Thanks for joining me. Thanks for coming to the talk. I know it's a long day, so giving a talk at like 3 p.m. is always more difficult than doing it first thing in the morning. But I hope you enjoy it. Here to talk about the Android Architecture Blueprints project. I hate to ask questions whenever I start a talk, but I have to ask. Does anybody know this project already? 1, 2, 3. Yes, good. You don't count because I told you about it this morning, so that doesn't count. My name is David González. I am an Android engineer at Help Scouts and a Google developer expert for Android. Jose Alferrica is the project lead. He couldn't be here today, but I wanted to keep his face because he's happy about it. And I'll talk a little bit about what Help Scout is. And our mission at Help Scout is to help companies build businesses that their customers love. And we have a set of tools to help them do that and to make every interaction with customer support more helpful and also more human. The project that we want to talk today is the Blueprints project. So this has been an effort with people from Google and from the community. And the main reason for this is if you're an Android developer or been following the Android news, you've known that for the last year and a half, there's a lot of discussions around architecture and how to build the architecture for an Android app. So many people will go model view presenter, other ones will go model view ViewModel, there's RxJava, there's different, even Kotlin now, they have different languages. And there's a lot of introduction posts to MVP, MVVM, or any other architecture, but it was very difficult to be able to compare all of those architectures. There are always different samples, and they're always in different repositories, so it's not always trivial to understand the differences, or the key differences between all those different architectures. The main idea behind this project was to have a collection of the same sample, the same app, but having different approaches to solve the same problems, and having a different collection of architectures so we can then compare them. And if you don't know one of those, then you can learn how it's done, and you can compare to something which is more familiar to you. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. The sample lives in the Google samples repository. If you know who's this guy, okay, take his advice. He wants you to start the project. I think it's a small internal battle between Jose and Nick Butcher about stars, and Jose's salary depends on how much stars do we have in this project. So he's a nice guy, so please start the project so he can get his final pay. But the main point is this: is the sample is an official Google product, and it's not just made by Googlers; it's also made by part of the community. But it is a reference. Then when I did start a few years ago to learn Android, I would go to find what Google did. And until now, there was not an opinion about how to build an Android app. And this is what we've done with the architecture project. This is a small list of everybody who's been collaborating for now. On the left side, you have people from Google and ex-Googlers, and then people who are more actively involved with the project. And on the other list, you have people who's been either commenting, adding issues, submitting pull requests, or giving their own opinions, and they are there. So there's somebody from here in the room, and if you want to contribute, it's a great place to do some open source. So that's very interesting. The main idea behind all this is why should we care about this? This is a post in Google Plus from Diane Hackburn, who, if you know her, she's main engineer behind the Android framework. And her opinion was, well, I don't know if you have to use MVP or MVC or anything. They build a framework, and the framework is built to run performance and to run in all those devices we have. And I think it shouldn't be their job to tell us how to build all the different apps. I think it's a great advantage that we have, that we can decide which architecture do we want to follow? Do we want to use MVP, MVVM, or any of the other different architectures that exist? And it's up to us to decide. And essentially, it's up to us and the team who we're working with to decide which type of architecture we want to follow. And can you imagine that by default you would have the observables from RxJava coming from an Android activity? Or you would have to extend or implement by default a presenter in all your activities. That would be limiting a lot the way that we can do our job, which is being engineers and trying to do things the right way. So I think it's great that they don't give us how to do it exactly, and it's up to us to interpret and decide how we want to do it. In terms of who is this project for, if you're in the middle of that range, that's perfect for you. If you're starting on Android now, and there's a lot of things that you should learn before looking into how to build the app using a clean architecture or RxJava. Before all that, you should learn about the activity lifecycle. You should learn about broadcast receivers and services and content providers and SQLite. That's all that knowledge you should have before you start diving yourself into building a project. If you've been doing Android for 5-6 years and you've done a lot of different apps, those problems that you're gonna discuss in this sample, you face them already. So probably it's not the right project for you because you're not gonna learn much. It's gonna be useful if you fall into this middle category where you've been doing Android for a few years, you've maybe done a few production apps, but you want to improve the quality of what you're shipping. And you want to make it easier for you in the future to add new features, to change the way you're doing, or even just to learn and experiment with different technologies, then this is the perfect project for you. Because you're going to be able to learn a lot of new things, and it's going to be very easy for you to understand how those things work. In terms of the project itself, it's not just an architecture project, it's a testing project in disguise. Many of the discussions I would have when I go to conferences or events about Android, many of those questions are asking about architecture and how to do it. But in reality, many of those questions are about testing. How can I test that the data is being stored in my database? How can I test that the different components between my application, how they interact together? How can I test that this little button here works the way it's supposed to be? And many of the answers end up being related to how the app is built. And if you don't have a proper structure in your code, it's going to be extremely difficult to test anything. So in this project, you're going to find 3 different types of tests. And I'm not going to use the pyramid because I think we've discussed a lot about it. And I think yesterday was a great talk with a new version of that pyramid, which was interesting. But the main testing part of this project is the UI testing. So that is the most important because they are reliable, or we try to make them reliable, and we want them to be hermetic. And we'll go into this a little more detail after that. There's decent unit test coverage. And by decent means not every unit in the project is tested. We are not testing that the objects are created as they are supposed to be. What we're testing is that the actual implementation is working as it's supposed to. So if you're looking at the MVP branch, we're testing that the presenter is talking to the view in the way it's supposed to be. And then we talk that the repositories with data are talking to the presenter the way they are supposed to do it. And that's what we mean with decent unit test coverage. And then we have the non-UI tests that are obviously they're slower, they run on a JVM, and we want them to be as 100% working all the time. But those are tests that you run in your virtual machine. And the problem was we don't have Roboelectric, or we are not using PowerMock, so we are not mocking final classes, we are not using Roboelectric. Not because we think it's a bad idea, it's simply there's no need for it when you test the project in the way we've done it here. And that would be the 3 types of tests that we are running. This is the app. we spent months thinking of the design and thinking of the different implementations. Essentially, it's a very simple app that has three main points. One is to be able to list a series of tasks. You can edit them or delete them. And then there's a second screen with statistics that shows you how many tasks you've completed or how many tasks you have active. This is complicated enough for us to be able to experiment with different versions, but it's also easy enough to be able to switch between different branches and not having a very extreme large list of differences between all those different implementations. As of now, we have all these different branches active. As today, everything is branched out from the basic model view presenter model, and all the other branches are branching out from that one. So we have one with loaders, where all those samples are very opinionated samples, and the main point is that anyone can come and contribute, and we encourage them to do so. So there's a version with loaders where, and there's a bit of a discussion within the community whether your presenter should know about the Android framework, should have dependencies on the Android framework or not. In this case, the loader sample, they do have dependencies. So they will have the fragment, the loader manager will be inside those presenters. From that, there's another branch for content providers. And that's interesting if you're trying to share data from your app to the rest of the apps on your system, then that's a very good sample that shows you how to do that. There is an example with data binding, one following the clean architecture pattern, and then one with dependency injection using Dagger 2, and then there's one also stable with a version of RX Java that was worked from Florina Muntenescu and Eric Hellman. In development, we have a tablet version, and we'll talk about it a bit later, but those samples, they all have fragments as the main view component. The main reason behind that was to be able to get tablets working and be able to show that sample. And then what I found more interesting from the whole project is the external contributions. We have one fragmentless, which is same thing with MVP, but using views and not using fragments. And then there's one using Conductor, which is a library that allows you to, compose views and do the navigation between them in a VDS UA. And this was an external sample from somebody else who wanted to do it, and they presented it. And we'll go a bit later how to, if you're interested in contributing and helping out, we'll also talk about how to do that recently. And when we're talking about the testing part, we treat UI testing as a contract. And basically, if you're creating a new sample and you're branching out from any of the actual branches that exist, you do some changes and you run all the UI tests with Espresso, as we'll see later. If those tests are green and they are working, chances are that everything that you've done is correct, because the implementation of a UI test is going to be the same whether you're using RX Java, you're using MVP Clean, or any other different architecture. This is one of the tests that we have. This is simply rotating the device and ensuring that the icon of the task is still selected. We simply load a task. We're just going to click. I want to check that the delete icon is displayed. We're going to change the orientation of the device, and then we want to check that the title, the description, and the icon, they are all in the correct position and saying what they're supposed to say. And then we just say that the delete icon is displayed. This test is the same whatever type of architecture you're running. There's no difference. I think that's the strongest part of this, because it doesn't matter which formula you want to follow, this is going to be the same test. And having the same test for all the different samples and all the different types is very helpful. When we're starting to discuss how to build the project and what decisions we want to make, there are several that we took, and we're going to go a bit further into detail here. There's 2 flavors, and the part of the UI test that you saw before, they are all running in the mock flavor. The reason for that is that we are simply passing in a mock implementation of your data model. So in the reality, we don't have a REST API. There's no server we are talking to retrieve a list of data. We're just faking it. But in the mock implementation of it is a direct call. The reason being is your UI test, if you're testing UI and not testing user flows, for the UI test, there's no need for you to go to the internet and grab data. You shouldn't have to wait for it. We're just passing in a mock implementation of it that returns a list of tasks that we want to test. And we say which tasks we want to retrieve. We say which tasks we want to do assertions against. And it's easy to do UI test in this way. This works with Dagger and with any other architecture pattern as well. By default, it's using the minifier and the shrinker, simply because it's good to have it. This project is not going to go above the 65,000 method limit, but as a sample to explain how it works, it's a very good example. This is a very more controversial decision. All those samples by default, they are using fragments. The main reason is it is a good practice, and having tablets as an opinion, as an idea to having that version implemented, it was very easy to just simply use those 2 fragments at the same time. Not saying that you have to do everything with fragments. There's also a version with views, and it's up to you to decide. And the beautiful thing is you can simply go and compare it. And then there's no, as I said, there's no REST API that we are using to talk and grabbing the data from, which is a simulated network call. And essentially the remote data source are just waiting 2 seconds before returning just clicking on a background thread and clicking a handler. So we have this background asynchronicity to return the data from. We'll talk about how we want to improve that when we go to the future version of the project. But this is not just a collection of samples. We want this to be a framework where everybody can discuss and they can learn from it. In terms of you never used Rx Java and you've read a lot of blog posts about it, and you want to see how it actually works, you can come to the project and check. You're familiar with one of the branches already, so you can simply go and compare and learn how Rx Java works in this sample. It's also great for discussion, and we have very good discussions about how to implement different data repositories, or how to implement different a presenter for different views. And that's also good to have like a healthy discussion. It can be used as a sample. In my case, when I started Help Scout 7 months ago, I took the clean architecture as a template, and I've been evolving the app from that template, adding things that I needed for my app. So it's a good example, as a good sample to based on you want to test a new app, you can take that one and you can start building from it. You don't need to do all the first steps. It's all going to be there. And then if you are active in GitHub and you care about often having more or less stars in your repos, then it's also, this project as of today has 12,000 stars. So be part of a project which is active development and has people working on it. It's also nice. So that's also other thing you can do with it. I think the most important part of the whole talk is how to make the most out of the project, and how to use blueprints in a way that is going to be useful for any of you folks. First thing you can do is simply browse on GitHub. All the project is separated in different branches, so you can simply change branches and try to do like Jose tries to do, always clicking. I always end up clicking on the class name every time. It never navigates, thinking this Android Studio is going to navigate to the class. It never happens. But you can check all different classes on GitHub, and that's the first thing that you can do. The more powerful way of doing it is just comparing locally, and essentially having 2 branches and comparing them. If you have a good diff tool, I want to show you the sample of using Meld, this is MVP clean on one side and MVP on the other side. This gives you a nice tree view of what files have changed for both branches. And if you go more into detail, it will show you the actual lines that have changed. So in a comparison between MVP and MVP Clean, the only thing that changes in this part is the way you create the presenter. All the rest of the code is the same. So it's very easy to compare how do you do this if you're using Dagger, or how do you do this if you're using RxJava. And it's a very simple way to compare all the different branches. And the main point is to keep the difference between all those branches at the minimum. So it's easy to navigate and to compare. In terms of different branches that we have, I'm going to be talk a little bit about what the opinionated samples that we've developed for now and how they work. If you're familiar with MVP, this is the sample version. When on the right side you will have your presentation layer. We have now using fragments, and that yellow box is the activity. So the activity is the one that creates presenters, and obviously the one that creates the fragments. And then that presenter talks to repository. And without following naming conventions that we've been discussed for a long time, the only thing that repository is doing is deciding whether grabbing data from a remote data source or grabbing it from a local data source. And it's going to be the one in charge of when I grab data from remote, I store it in local, and then I bring it back to the presentation layer. The data source, the local storage, we're using SQLite, but it's built in a way that if you wanted to have Realm or ORM or whatever other local data source, you could also go and change it easily. Comparing with Clean, there's a new box that has appeared now. That is the domain layer. And that domain layer is the one that has use cases and has all the business logic. The approach for MVP that we followed was the passive view, which means that the views have no business logic whatsoever. They don't know anything. They don't hold any state that is related to the business. The presenter is telling, hey, view, show this message or show this list of tasks. That's all it does. And Clean is the evolution of that pattern where all the domain and business logic is holding these use cases. And they can be unit tested. They can be tested in integration with the presentation layer. So it's going to be anything which is related to the business is holding that in that domain layer. And the data layer doesn't change. It's exactly the same as it was before. This sample is a bit more complex because we have content providers. And what we're killing in this side is the repository has an in-memory cache that we use to mimic having an HTTP cache or a local LRU cache. This case, the loader is the one that works as a cache. So the loader knows whether it has to requery the data from the data source or can just simply bring it back to the presentation layer. And the difficult part to test here is that the presenters have a dependency from the framework, which means that if you're mocking, you will have to mock those classes. And using the mockable laundry jar, we don't need to go through Roboelectric. We can simply mock loaders and fragments, so we can and fragment managers, so we can do that too. But the other part is the same. We just added a content provider that is the one that sends in charge of provide the information to the loader. But all the other classes are exactly the same as they were before. Data binding, now, this is a bit of an experiment because there are different versions of those presenters. There's some of them using ViewModel and not talking, all the logic is in the ViewModel. There is a version with ViewModels and presenters that have more logic. It's all in the same branch, so it's nice to have a different experience, but we should work a little bit more in this sample. In terms of from the educational perspective, there are we were interested in understanding what findings we could have from comparing all these different approaches. The first one that comes to mind is is the method counts very different between all those samples, or is the APK size very different? And the reality is it's almost the same. And now it's not a huge project with 25 developers committing code every day, but numbers show that there's basically no difference between these samples. This is the version without the minifier. So you can see in the data binding one has this third bar that you see is the one with the external dependencies. So this is the data binding dependencies and the methods that are coming when we import the library. But all the rest is just 1,000 methods difference between all those different samples. It's even less. And the brown one is the version when the minifier is enabled. So in terms of methods, it's basically irrelevant, the difference between it. In terms of APK size, it's the same. RxJava was very similar to data binding because it brings all the RxJava dependencies. But in terms of APK size, it's 1.2 to 1.3 megs. So it's basically the same thing. It's a bit difficult to show at a glance how was the difference between all these different samples. So the main idea was to show we have a table in the wiki that you can refer to, and it gives you at a glance numbers that are interesting to discuss. We show the difference between the dex counts and also an opinion of how difficult would it be, how testable one sample is. For example, if we would go to the content providers one, testability is medium because it's harder to go and add new tests, taking into account all the Android framework dependencies that we have. But then if you go to the clean sample, the testability is very high because it's very simple to test any new features that you would add. There's a complexity and learning cost, and that's in terms of, for example, RxJava. It's not just you have to learn a few things. There's a few things that you have to learn before you understand it, so the learning cost is going to be a bit higher, but then maybe in the long term is the right approach for you. And it's a bit of a use case and advantages about why would you use this approach or one sample or another, and I will try to explain that there too. This is kind of a cry for help. We've been working for this, I think, around 7 or 8 months, and we've seen some traction from the community, but I would like to get this to a higher level, where this is inspired in a version called Taste MVC, to do MVC, which is done for Node.js, and it has a huge community of supporters, and you can browse a lot of different the same sampling as a lot of different ways for the web. So we would like to be kind of a reference in that sense for the Android part. It's very easy to just chip in and answer questions that somebody can have, and there's a lot of them in the issue list. Help with wikis and help with articles. It's very easy to go and create samples. There are guidelines as opposed to how to create a new sample and how to contribute. We have some people in the past adding, I've done a sample loading images from 500 pixels or things like that. But that's not what this is about. We want to have the same sample with different approaches. And if you don't long enough, it's easy to just go and become a core maintainer and be able to merge into master and do like a release of the branch. As an example of how contribution works, Greg here, he does a sample for Conductor, and it was very interesting how he approached it. He would say, hey, I've done this sample, I'm using Conductor, this is a library, this is in my repo, I've forked your repo so you can go and check it out. What do you guys think? So I went into it, I looked at it, I had no idea what he was saying, so I just said, yep, thumbs up, you can merge it. That's the level that we have as of now to merge things into the repo. But essentially, he was asking, I've done this, what do you guys think? The proposal for the RxJava sample, and now that you can have emojis in the comments on GitHub, it was very easy. Somebody would say, hey, I would like to see this. What do you guys think? And then people went and voted and saying, yes, we're interested in see MVP with RxJava. We would like somebody to do it. And Eric and Florina, they volunteered. So we just simply assigned the issue to them, and they went and started working on it. And this is from Etienne, is another GD from Montreal, and he said, I want to do this. and it's an extremely long discussion about post about what he would like to do based on links that he's read on the internet, based on libraries that he's seen. And it's a very long post that explains very thoroughly, this is what I would like to do. What do you think? And that's another way you can contribute as well, saying, I would like to do a sample with Kotlin and Redux architecture. Simply post it there, explain what you want to do, and then people will react and say, yes, we want to see it. Please go ahead and do it. But forgot to say from before, there are people who's been opening pull requests, changing the version of the Gradle plugin, or changing the version of the support libraries. That is not very helpful, because the main disadvantage that we have with having different branches is that we have to keep all those branches up to date. So if you open a pull request against one branch changing a Gradle plugin, we will need to go manually and change all the rest and be able to ensure that your name is going to be on the list. So it's going to be a bit more complicated. So you can simply open an issue saying, hey, this is up to date. Would you like to, can you please update it? And then we'll take care of that. In terms of V2, and this is the interesting part moving forward, it's only experience with MVP as the main sample, and it's only one to-do app. The future is to have different apps and how different architectures evolve in those samples as well. So we would like to see a chat client, or would like to see, or whatever you folks want to see, and explore more things than just a to-do app. Because I know that we've seen all seen to-do apps, and they are very boring. So we like to have something different. In terms of different patterns, there's no MVC for now, or there's no Redux or Flux. It'd be amazing to have comparisons between Redux and Clean, or Redux and RX. So that's also going to be it is in the roadmap, and we like to work on that. We would like to work on the platform for discussion, because one of the main advantages from this project is that we can have a healthy discussion about different architectures. And we tried Gitter for a while, and that didn't work very well because it was hard to keep track of everything that was going on. We have issues in GitHub, and that's still okay, but maybe we find a way, or if you know any way that we improve that discussion, I'm more than happy to hear that as well. And then we have now running all the UI tests and continuous integration. So somebody opened a PR add-on Circle CI. So we had Travis, but Travis had issue with all the flakiness of the emulators. So we have now Circle CI, and that is working. So whenever you open a pull request, Circle CI will build it, and I will run all the UI tests. And that's it. Have a lot of time left, so we like discussions and opinions about the project or different architectures. You can reach us out Twitter or simply in the repo. And if you have any questions, please go ahead. Don't fall asleep just yet. Well, thank you.